Hey guys, tonight we time travel to a place where privacy doesn't exist. Your bed may come with someone else already in it, and your feet are sore from trudging across muddy roads just to find a place to collapse. You're cold, wet, hungry, and the local innkeeper greets you like a man who knows you've got no better option. Yes, we're talking about medieval inns, and more specifically, the strange but very real practice of charging people for just half a bed. You probably won't survive this, or at least you won't get much sleep. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. I love seeing how far this cozy little corner of the internet can stretch. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You enter town just after dusk, your boots squelching with every step, the hem of your woolen tunic heavy with mud and sheep-scented water. You're exhausted, and the crooked silhouettes of wooden buildings loom over you like sleepy giants. The church bells have long stopped chiming. Smoke curls lazily from chimneys, hinting at fires you aren't near enough to enjoy yet. And somewhere in this warren of cobbled alleys and shuttered windows, there's got to be an inn. You finally spot it, a crooked sign hanging from rusted chains, depicting something vaguely bed-like and possibly on fire. Charming. The building tilts slightly to one side, like it's trying to shake off a rough night of its own. You step inside. It smells of ale, wet dog, and something vaguely turnip adjacent. There's laughter, a lute, and a guy in the corner who may or may not be asleep with his eyes open. A cat slinks under your bench. You approach the counter, where a stout man with a face like boiled leather sizes you up. His beard is frosted with breadcrumbs. "Room?" you ask. "Half a bed," he replies, with a grin that says, "I know you've never done this before." You blink. He gestures toward a set of stairs that creak like an orchestra of unhappy mice. Upstairs. Might still be warm. Your bedmate's already turned in. Now, if you're from the modern world, and you are, this idea is as strange as it is mildly alarming. But in medieval Europe, beds were expensive. The average peasant's bed was often a wooden frame filled with straw and bugs, shared with family, guests, and sometimes livestock. So the idea of renting space in a bed, not the whole bed, mind you, just your side, made a weird kind of economic sense. It was, essentially, a sleep economy of scale. You climb the stairs, each step groaning beneath you. The hallway is dark, lit only by the flickering orange glow of a single torch wedged into a rusty bracket. Doors are ajar. Snores echo from all directions. Someone coughs, a dry, emphatic thing that says tuberculosis without needing to. Your room, or perhaps sleeping closet is a better word, is barely wide enough for the mattress, which is more like a sack of hay fighting to escape from burlap. Lying there, half covered by a thin wool blanket, is another human being. They grunt in their sleep. You slide onto your assigned half, trying not to disturb the already settled stranger. There's no pillow, just a rolled-up cloak. Your side of the bed smells faintly of onions. You make peace with that. Historically, this arrangement was more common than you'd think. Sharing a bed with strangers wasn't considered shameful. It was practical. People on pilgrimages, traveling merchants, laborers, Even minor nobles on the move often found themselves side by side in such arrangements, and innkeepers were all too happy to double book beds. Why charge one tired traveler when you could charge two? One recorded example comes from 15th century England, where beds and coaching inns were explicitly listed as shared accommodation. Travelers often arrived with their own bedding to make the situation slightly less grim. Those who couldn't afford even half a bed might rent a space by the hearth or curl up in a stable. It wasn't glamorous. It was just normal. And it wasn't without its own etiquette. You, the newcomer, are expected not to elbow, not to hog the blanket, and above all, not to talk. Talking was weird. Talking implied intimacy. And in this moment, intimacy is the last thing either of you wants. As you settle in, 1,000 tiny itches begin to crawl across your skin. Whether it's fleas, lice, or just the suggestion of both, your mind can't help but spiral. You shift slightly, trying to find a position that doesn't press your hip bone into the wall. Your bedmate snorts. Fun fact: many inns in the 13th and 14th centuries didn't even have individual rooms. Sleeping spaces were divided by curtains at best, and the idea of a private room was something reserved for the fabulously wealthy or the dangerously suspicious. And here's a quirky detail. Some inns offered what was called a straw bed, a literal pile of straw on the floor, shared among several guests, sometimes separated by blankets, sometimes not. It was cheaper than the half bed, but also more communal. Think of it as the medieval version of a hostel dorm bunk, minus the complimentary Wi-Fi. You lie there, eyes closed, as the inn settles into silence, or something like it. From downstairs, muffled singing. Somewhere nearby, two drunk men argue about who won a dice game. A donkey brays from outside. You sigh. Historians still argue whether this kind of bed sharing was a result of genuine hospitality customs or simply economic desperation. There are records that suggest both. Some inns offered the arrangement proudly, while others clearly saw it as a last resort for those without coin or connections. You roll onto your side, careful not to trespass the invisible bed border. The straw crunches. The blanket shifts. The stranger breathes. And somewhere in all of this, a strange peace settles in. You've made it. You have a roof, a blanket, a shared human warmth that's oddly comforting once you stop thinking about fleas. Tomorrow, there will be more mud, more walking, more strange signs swinging on rusty chains. But for now, you drift. Somewhere between medieval chaos and sleep, you wake to the smell of sour breath and damp wool. Your bedmate, who last night was an anonymous breathing form, now turns out to be a man with eyebrows so bushy they could shelter sparrows, and a snore that sounds like boiling porridge. He's still fast asleep, mouth open, blanket half pulled over to his side. You inch out of bed like you're disarming a trap. Your joints complain. The straw mattress left an imprint across your back that might be permanent. There's no chamber pot in the room, so you'll have to brave the outhouse in the courtyard. But first, breakfast, or at least the illusion of it. As you make your way down the rickety stairs, the innkeeper greets you again with that same knowing grin. He's wiping a tankard with a cloth that, judging by its grayish tone, hasn't been properly washed since the last crusade. He slaps it on the bar and points at a wooden board. Prices. And right there, in uneven, chalky script, one bed, half night, one side, 2 pence. You blink. Half night, one side? He nods as if this makes perfect sense. It doesn't. But let's be honest. You're too tired to argue. This was a very real quirk of the medieval lodging industry. Beds weren't just shared, they were also timed. If you arrived late and someone had already paid for the early half of the night, you could get the second shift. You'd climb in, warm spot and all, as the previous sleeper rolled out. Recycled warmth, medieval energy efficiency at its finest. In fact, this practice led to the term warming pan being applied to people. You, dear listener, might be sleeping in someone's leftover heat. It's gross, yes, but also kind of poetic, like an accidental hug from history. The innkeeper gestures toward a new board he's just set up beside the fire. It's a sort of chart, listing rates not just by bed halves, but by time blocks, group size, and body odor risk. That last one may or may not be a joke. With innkeepers, it's hard to tell. Now, he wants to upsell you. You want the corner bunk with the dry straw? He asks. 4 pence. Comes with a clean blanket, washed just this week. Or 2 pence gets you the middle bed, but you'll be sharing with Old Henry again. Old Henry. That's his name, apparently. You glance over and see your former bedmate scratching his belly through a hole in his tunic. He burps, loudly. The idea of clean linens is laughable by modern standards. Most inns didn't wash bedding between guests. Blankets were shared. Mattresses rarely refreshed. Lice were as common as spoons. Some establishments tried to minimize outbreaks by airing straw beds in sunlight or sprinkling herbs inside the ticking, but that was the exception, not the rule. Still, you hand over your 2 pence. You're not made of money, and you're already intimately familiar with Henry's feet. Later that morning, you watch as a group of travelers arrives. 2 merchants with bulging saddlebags, a woman in a fur-trimmed hood, and a boy carrying what looks like a live goose under his arm. The innkeeper rubs his hands. Business is booming. He starts his pitch. 2 beds left, he calls out. 4 sides. Might be 5 if we count the bench near the chimney. First come, first served. One merchant frowns. Any privacy? Curtain on one side, candle stub extra. The woman snorts. She's clearly done this before. I want the west bed, left side. No feet near my face this time. And thus begins the negotiation ritual. Half beds get bartered. Some travelers arrive in pairs and can share a full bed. Others are solo and must pair up, sometimes unwillingly, with strangers. If no partner is available, the innkeeper makes a note to try and fill the empty side later. It's like a weird game of Tetris, but with body heat and hay. One of the merchants offers to pay double for exclusive rights to his bed. The innkeeper raises an eyebrow. That's 4 pence then. No refunds if someone crawls in drunk. This, too, was historically grounded. Inns charged higher rates for privacy, but they couldn't guarantee it. Drunkards, wanderers, or even desperate travelers sometimes slipped into empty beds. And unless there was a lock, which there rarely was, enforcement was lax. You step outside into the courtyard for some air. The chickens are pecking at a puddle. A donkey eyes you suspiciously. The outhouse is occupied, judging by the muffled humming, possibly by someone who's made it their new residence. Inside, the innkeeper is scribbling in a little ledger. You peek over his shoulder and see rows of initials, numbers, and cryptic notes, like TM, half bed, right, snorer, SF, floor straw, near fire, 1 blanket, G and W, full bed, pay advance. He notices you reading and gives a proud nod. Gotta keep track. Can't go mixing up sides. That's how fights start. Indeed, fights were common, Sleeping arrangements could quickly become flashpoints, especially if someone encroached on the wrong half or snored too enthusiastically. A 14th century innkeeper in York reportedly kept a stick behind the bar for bed disputes. It wasn't for stirring stew. Historians still argue whether the half-bed system emerged out of space constraints, economic strategy, or just social norms that made sharing less awkward than we'd expect today. Some even theorize that early communal sleeping fostered stronger community ties, or, alternately, encouraged deeply passive-aggressive behavior. You watch as a large man with no visible neck negotiates a spot on a bench. The innkeeper offers him a bundle of rags and a nod toward the hearth. No bed left? Half won, but the other half's claimed by a man who talks in his sleep about wolves. The big man shakes his head. I'll take the bench. The economy of beds wasn't just about sleep. It was also about status. Merchants paid more. Travelers with references got the best spots. And locals with poor reputations ended up near the door. Or worse, in the stable with the goats. And goats don't snore, but they do chew your boots. Back inside, a chalkboard now reads, full bed, shared, 4 pence, half bed, 2 pence, floor straw, 1 pence, bench sleep, free, no blankets. Simple, brutal, effective. You sit down with a piece of hard bread and ale, watered down past the point of flavor. The woman with the goose nods at you. First time, you nod. She grins. You'll get used to it, or you'll get lice, one or the other. You sip your ale. It tastes like someone once described beer in the next room. The inn is filling up. You realize your side of the bed will soon have a name assigned to it again. You wonder who it will be tonight. And just like that, the idea of a half bed, weird as it was, begins to feel like normal. It's not comfort, it's compromise. But in a world of mud, rain, and bandits on the road, it's something. And sometimes, something is enough. You return to your bed that evening with a mix of dread and resignation, half expecting old Henry again, half hoping for someone less nasal. But luck has not been on your side today. Your new bedmate is already there, boots off, socks steaming gently in the torchlight like 2 pickled onions left in the sun. He gives you a nod, no words, just a sort of grunted, "Yep, I'm here too." You slide into your assigned half of the straw mattress, like someone trying to sneak past a sleeping bear. The blanket is scratchier than you remember. Maybe it's a new one. Maybe it's yours now. Or maybe this is just what happens when your bedmate brings their own fermented foot fog to the party. This is the shared bed experience, a microcosm of medieval social norms. You're now co-occupying a space no wider than a modern twin mattress, and the only barrier between you and this man, whose name you still don't know, is pure willpower and clenched limbs. Etiquette matters here. A lot. In the absence of privacy, rules develop fast. You don't ask questions. You don't face each other. You don't snore if you can help it. And if someone has to pass wind, you both pretend it never happened. One of the earliest manuals on travel etiquette, The Goodman of Paris, doesn't mention bed sharing explicitly, but we know from various household accounts and inn records that it was common practice. In fact, sharing beds wasn't just for travelers. Even in domestic life, entire families often slept in the same bed. This meant that the skill of sleeping beside someone without punching them in the nose was highly developed across classes. But even so, sharing with a stranger came with unique challenges. You shift positions silently, your elbow hovering millimeters from the other man's ribs. He shifts too. You both adjust at the same time, creating a sort of unspoken choreography of discomfort. And yet, strange as it sounds, there were benefits. Shared body heat was the medieval equivalent of central heating. In winters, it was either this or freeze. Some travelers even preferred a half bed to floor straw, especially in colder regions. The innkeeper, who now seems to take delight in watching the nightly shuffle, occasionally assigns people to each other based on size. "You look like you'll fit next to her," he once said, pairing a wiry scribe with a tall milkmaid. No kicking, aye. There were unwritten rules about sharing with the opposite sex. In most reputable inns, male and female guests were separated, at least by room, if not always by actual partition. But mistakes, or accidental arrangements, did happen. And some inns didn't exactly prioritize chaste boundaries. Historians still argue whether innkeepers deliberately match certain guests in hopes of tips, gossip, or more scandalous benefits. Some accounts suggest that travelers themselves sometimes requested a warm bed and warmer company, which might sound like a medieval euphemism, and probably was. You remember earlier, at dinner, watching a pair of travelers negotiating who would get the inside part of the bed, closer to the wall. In theory, it was the safer spot. Less risk of being trampled by a wandering pig. More warmth, but also harder to exit in a hurry, which in a building made of mostly wood, with torches everywhere, was no small thing. In your case, you drew the outside half, so you're sleeping right at the bed's edge, where every toss or turn might deposit you onto the cold, flea-infested floor. You sigh. You try not to move. You stare at the ceiling beam and count knots in the wood. But the shared bed is more than just cramped quarters. It's a social experience. You learn things, sometimes whether you want to or not. Your bedmate mumbles something. You can't quite make it out. Is he dreaming? Praying? Cursing an ex-wife? He turns toward you in his sleep. Too far, friend. You scoot back. Many travelers shared more than space. They shared stories. There are recorded cases of bedfellows becoming business partners, allies, or even lifelong friends after a single night of awkward sleeping proximity. When the lights are out and the options are talk or silently stew, conversation sometimes wins. But not tonight. Tonight your companion snores like a rusty bellows. The inn creaks around you. Someone laughs downstairs. A lute plays 2 notes, then stops. You imagine the player gave up mid-song out of sheer fatigue. You think about the people who passed through this place. Farmers, monks, thieves, merchants, nobles, maybe even someone famous once. All of them wedged into straw-filled rectangles beside strangers. All of them dreaming dreams scented faintly with cabbage. And speaking of cabbage, there's a smell now. It's unclear whether it's your bedmate or a kitchen leak, but either way, it's here. Medieval inns weren't exactly designed for air circulation. Chimneys worked when they felt like it. Windows, if they existed, were tiny and often sealed in winter, which means smells lingered. Even the most prestigious inns of the time, such as those in major pilgrimage towns like Canterbury or Santiago de Compostela, weren't immune to the realities of crowded sleeping quarters. Beds were expensive, space was precious, and in towns where festivals or fairs were held, every inch of straw-covered floor might be sold, leased, or laid upon. There's even a documented case from 1388 where a London innkeeper was fined for cramming 10 people into a single sleeping chamber meant for 4. Overstuffed like sausages, one complaint read. You can imagine the smell. Still, the night presses on. You find a rhythm to the shared breathing. The snores don't exactly vanish, but your body begins to ignore them. And here's the strange part. Despite the discomfort, despite the claustrophobia and the onion-scented linens, you're not entirely miserable. You're warm. You're safe. You're wrapped in a blanket that's been wrapped around dozens before you, and somehow that feels grounding. Tomorrow, you might wake up with a flea bite, or a new friend, or both. But for now, you let your eyes drift shut, the sound of the fire downstairs merging with the faint breathing beside you. It's not luxury, but it's sleep. You wake with your face pressed into something that smells faintly of garlic and wet wool. It takes a few seconds to remember where you are, until the unmistakable crunch of straw beneath your hip reminds you. Your bedmate is already gone, the blanket in a lumpy pile where he left it, still holding the shape of his body like a soft straw sculpture. You sit up slowly, your back creaking like the inn staircase, and stretch until your spine sounds like a cart axle snapping. You glance around the small room. The other bed is occupied by two men who've somehow managed to sleep head to foot, creating a sort of medieval yin and yang. One of them is snoring into the other's toes. Neither seems to mind. As you gather your things, mostly a threadbare satchel, your cloak, and the emotional baggage of sleeping beside strangers, you start thinking about the bed itself. And that's when you really notice it. This isn't a bed the way you know beds. It's more like a box of straw with aspirations. The wooden frame groans when you shift your weight. The mattress is a sack, probably filled with chaff, animal hair, or the remnants of long-dead thistles. There's no pillow, only a crumpled tunic someone once mistook for luxury. This was, shockingly, standard. Medieval beds were a patchwork of materials and designs depending on your social status. Wealthy travelers might enjoy feather mattresses and woven canopies. You, however, are encountering the budget option. Think hay, wool, and a whole lot of faith. What's under the bed is equally delightful. A scatter of mice droppings, someone's boot, and a button that looks older than most trees. You resist the urge to check the sheets for bugs. You already know they're there. In fact, bed bugs were so common that they made their way into proverbs. To lie with vermin wasn't an insult. It was a Tuesday. Inns sometimes tried to disguise the problem with sachets of herbs, like lavender or mint, stuffed into the corners. Others simply doused everything in vinegar and hoped for the best. One particularly grim record from a Flemish guest house notes infestation so severe that straw must be burned weekly. Still, people adapted. You did what everyone did, accepted that sleep wasn't a solo sport and that comfort was a sliding scale. Back downstairs, the common room is buzzing. Travelers, peddlers, and the inn's permanent lurkers are all gathering around the fire for breakfast. You sit on a stool that's slightly too short and order the morning stew, a dish that tastes like someone boiled sadness and added leeks. Across the room, a bearded man in a red tunic is arguing with the innkeeper. "I paid for the left side," he bellows. "You and 3 others claim that side," the innkeeper replies, not even looking up from polishing a pewter mug with what appears to be his sleeve. You should have been quicker. The left side of a bed, it turns out, was considered slightly better. Closer to the wall meant less exposure to cold drafts, and fewer surprise visits from nocturnal wanderers. The debate over which side has apparently been going on all morning. You smirk into your mug of water pretending to be ale. Sleeping position politics were very real in medieval inns. There's a record from a Parisian guest house in 1321 where two guests fought, physically, over which side of the bed was the warm side, and one ended up in a horse trough. The warm side, incidentally, was determined by who had slept in it first. Historians still debate whether the bedside hierarchy had roots in superstition or practicality. Some argue that sleeping on the outer edge made you vulnerable to spiritual influences, or, more likely, wandering hands. Others say it was simply about heat retention. Regardless, you learn to adapt. The trick is to sleep like a corpse, hands folded, limbs contained, zero sudden movements. That, or develop the confidence to stake out blanket territory before your partner even arrives. Later in the day, the innkeeper lets you tag along as he fluffs the mattresses, or at least gives them a few thwacks with a stick. Gotta keep 'em aired, he says. You notice that airing seems to involve opening a window the width of a soup spoon and letting the wind do its best. He lifts one of the straw sacks to reveal what looks like a family of spiders making rent-free use of the bed slats. He sighs. I keep telling the council we need proper frames. They say the mice like it. Beds, you realize, are both furniture and battlefield. Not just between guests, but between man and nature. The straw compresses with every use, meaning the beds get flatter and lumpier over time. In richer inns, the straw might be replaced every few weeks. Here, judging by the smell, not recently. That night, you're assigned a different room, shared with a merchant and what appears to be his collection of goose feathers. He's already settled in when you arrive, surrounded by bags, boots, and one extremely judgmental-looking goose. Left side's mine, he says. I sleep facing the wall. You nod. At least this one talks. The bed in this room is slightly better. Thicker mattress. Fewer audible insect colonies. There's even a shelf with a candle stub and a wooden comb. Fancy. You're moving up in the world. As you lie back, the merchant begins to hum. A soft, tuneless drone that somehow makes the room feel smaller. You close your eyes. Then you feel it, crunch. The straw beneath you shifts like someone stirring cereal with their elbow. You shift again, crunch. It's a sound you'll hear in your dreams forever. And just as you're about to drift off, the merchant speaks. You ever share a bed with a goat? You open one eye. No. He grunts. Not so bad. Warmer than people. You file that away under things I didn't need to know. Outside, the wind whistles through the slats. Someone in another room starts coughing. A deep, phlegmy cough that echoes through the walls. You curl tighter under the blanket. At least you have a wall to face tonight. At least the goose hasn't climbed into bed. Yet. Morning again. You wake up to the merchant already gone, his side of the bed looking remarkably undisturbed, as if he hovered all night instead of sleeping like a human being. The goose, however, remains. It's now perched on your boot, staring at you like it knows something you don't. You shift carefully, not wanting to startle it. You've survived 2 nights in this place, but you're not yet ready to fight poultry at dawn. You get dressed, gently nudge the goose off your foot, and head downstairs. The inn's common room is unusually quiet. A few guests are still nursing tankards, while others slump over their bowls of morning mush. The innkeeper is behind the bar, bent over a ledger, his stubby pencil moving like a man adding up a ransom. You take a seat near the fire. He looks up and grins. You're back again, eh? You nod, and he waves you over. You look like the curious sort, he says. Want to see how we do the numbers? What follows is a strange crash course in medieval inn economics. He opens his ledger and begins to explain who stays, who pays, and how much it all adds up. You're suddenly less a traveler and more a reluctant accountant. See here, he says, tapping a column. Half bed, 2 pence. Full bed, 4. But look, see these initials? That's 2 lads who shared a half and split the cost. Quarter bed, you ask? He cackles. Aye, bit tight that, usually for kids or lovebirds, or lovebirds who regret their decisions. He explains that each bed is a line item. Every side is potential income. If the room has 4 beds, that's 8 sides to rent. More if people agree to triple up. And during festivals or market days, the inn can double its usual earnings just by layering bodies like firewood. The economics of it are kind of brilliant and deeply unsettling. Of course, he continues, flipping a page, you've got expenses. New straw, candles, patching blankets, and the odd fine if someone complains too loud. You lean in. Complains about what? Mostly bedbugs, sometimes goats. Once, a monk accused a pig of heresy, but I think that was more about the snoring. The innkeeper chuckles to himself and takes a sip of something cloudy from a pewter mug. You're still processing the idea of quarter beds when a woman approaches the bar with a pouch of coins. She's a trader, judging by the bells sewn into her sleeves and the dusty weight of her boots. She drops the pouch and points up the stairs. Room 12, she says. Full bed, solo. Lock the door. The innkeeper raises an eyebrow. Double rate then. 8 pence. She nods. Worth it. You watch as he marks it in the ledger with a flourish. This is the upgraded package. No bedmate, no shared blankets, no mysterious elbows jabbing you at 2 a.m. It's rare, expensive, and coveted by travelers who've had enough of the cozy charm of shared sleeping quarters. That kind of solo privilege wasn't common. Most travelers didn't have the coin or clout to reserve a room alone. But those who did, wealthy merchants, nobles, or, on rare occasions, clergy with powerful patrons, paid dearly for the honor. Some inns even had tiered pricing: half bed, full shared bed, and gentleman's bed, which came with a lock, a bowl of water, and the promise of minimal fleas. Occasionally, they even provided bed warming services, which, despite the connotation, usually meant a stone heated by the fire or a child paid to lie in it for an hour before you arrived. Yes, child bed warming was a real medieval job. It's okay to shudder a little. Historians still argue whether these pricing models were standardized across regions or invented ad hoc by savvy innkeepers. What's clear is that beds were seen less as comfort and more as real estate, divided, flipped, and sold in slices like slightly smelly timeshares. And of course, not all guests paid in coin. The innkeeper flips further in his book and taps a row of symbols. This one gave me a duck. That one fixed the gate latch. That woman recited poetry to my wife. You squint at the scrawled notes. One of them simply says, 2 eggs plus small song. In rural inns, barter was common. A night's stay could be traded for labor, stories, food, or services. Some travelers carried pre-written letters of favor from clergy or nobility to earn free lodging. Others simply performed, sang songs, juggled spoons, or read palms in exchange for a meal and a square foot of straw. And then there were the scams. The innkeeper points to a name circled twice. He claimed to be a scribe, he says. Said he'd write me a signboard in Latin. Took my last candle, drank all the ale, then left me a note that just said Inus Maximus. Not even proper grammar. You laugh, but it's clear he's still bitter. Back at your table, you chew on a crust of bread and consider your own sleeping options. You've had 3 nights of half-bed living, 1 straw bite, a near goose incident, and now you're wondering, could you negotiate something better? You approach the bar. Any chance of a solo bed? The innkeeper smirks. Got a broom closet, full of brooms. But if you're flexible, you take a breath. But before you can answer, a group of travelers bursts in, dusty, loud, and reeking of road sweat. The innkeeper's eyes light up. Business. He turns to you. Make up your mind quick. Half beds go fast when the ale runs dry. You nod. I'll take the wall side. Again. 2 pence, he says. And if the other side's empty, it's yours till midnight. That's how the pricing game works. If no one shows up to claim the other half, you get lucky. But if someone stumbles in drunk at 11:59 p.m., you're back to communal breathing. You hand over the coin. He flips open his ledger and writes, You, wall side, room 7, watch for snorer. It's not glamorous. It's not restful. But it's a bed. Half of one anyway. And in this world, that's more than enough. There's a strange kind of hush in the air this evening. It's the kind of quiet that usually means something's coming. Outside, hooves clatter faintly on cobblestones. The innkeeper's polishing glasses again, aggressively. He's even tucked in his shirt, which in itself feels like a minor miracle. You're just finishing your watery stew when the door swings open. In they come. Not a ragtag bunch this time. These travelers shimmer. Capes trailing, boots too clean, silver embroidery catching the firelight just right. It's a royal convoy, or close enough. You know this because one of them is wearing a circlet, and none of them even glance at the price board. The innkeeper straightens. Good evening, your graces, he says, with a bow that cracks his back halfway through. The leader, a woman with braids so tight they could slice bread, nods without smiling. 4 rooms, separate, clean linens, and guards at each door. The entire inn goes silent. You hear someone drop a spoon, probably from shock at the phrase, clean linens. Here's the thing about royalty and nobility on the road. They still had to sleep. And while palaces offered feather beds and silk sheets, the average medieval highway did not. When royal parties traveled, they often sent servants ahead to prepare accommodations, or in some cases, brought their own tents, beds, and even furniture. But sometimes, like tonight, they had no choice but to crash at a common inn. That's when everything changed. The innkeeper, now sweating visibly, waves for the stable boy. Clear rooms 3 to 6, he hisses, and get the good straw. Not the goat straw, the good straw. You've never seen a broom move so fast. Suddenly, your half-bed in room 7 seems very public. You quietly decide not to mention the chicken you saw under the stairs earlier. One of the noble guards, armored like he's expecting an ambush during supper, plods over to the hearth. He doesn't speak. He just stands there, breathing audibly. You sip your ale and wonder how this is going to work. The inn is nearly full. Beds are already spoken for. Where will these high-born travelers sleep? As if summoned by your question, the innkeeper starts negotiating loudly with some of the current guests. 2 of you in room 4, you can share with Jory in the loft, aye? And you, Miss Ellsworth, you'd be doing me a great kindness moving into the back pantry for just 1 night. It's nearly a room. Ellsworth's glare could curdle milk. You're evicting me for lace collars and perfume? I'll throw in breakfast. 2 eggs. One, but boiled. She grumbles and grabs her satchel. This was common practice. When the wealthy arrived, the poor moved. Sometimes voluntarily, sometimes not. Space was rearranged, straw was fluffed, and price tags quietly tripled. Nobility might not be able to avoid the reality of medieval travel, but they could certainly price themselves above it. Even the concept of sharing a bed took on new meaning. Noble travelers often insisted on private beds, but if beds weren't available, servants were used instead. And not just to prepare beds. No, in some households, a servant might lie in the bed first to warm it, or even sleep on the floor beside it, ready to rise at the master's first sneeze. Historians still debate whether this was purely practicality or a performative power move. The message was clear either way. I don't share. Meanwhile, you overhear 2 of the younger noble women whispering near the stairs. Do you think they've ever scrubbed the tubs here? There are tubs. Exactly. You retreat back to your stool, watching the transformation unfold. Fresh candles are lit. Blankets are shaken out in the open air. Someone even sprays rosemary water, which is a generous term for dunks a branch in ale and waves it around. The innkeeper notices your gaze and shrugs. They're paying 10 times the rate, he says. For that, they can have 2 halves each. 2 halves each. That's a full bed, with no one on the other side. Scandalous. That night, you head up to your usual room, only to find a note pinned to the door. Guest relocated. Room 9, left side. Room 9 turns out to be the attic. Sloped ceiling, a smell of wet rope, and a bed so narrow you're pretty sure it was originally a bench. Still, the left side is yours. The right, empty, for now. You crawl in, pulling the blanket over your shoulders, when the door creaks. Your heart sinks, but it's not a guard. It's one of the noble servants, young, flushed, dragging a bag nearly his size. He stops when he sees you. You too, then. You nod. He sighs. At least this one doesn't snore. My last bedmate talked in his sleep about turnips. You smile politely and scoot over. He slides in, carefully keeping to his edge. And so, you find yourself once again beside a stranger, albeit one who smells faintly of sandalwood and despair. From below, the sounds of the royal party drift upward. Boots on stairs, orders barked, doors opened and shut. You hear a clatter of armor being removed, followed by a long sigh that could only come from someone used to better. You and your bedmate lie in silence for a while. Then he whispers, "Do you think they'll leave early?" "Depends," you murmur. "If they see the goat." He chuckles softly. "If they see the goat, they'll burn the place down." You both drift off to sleep, listening to the quiet complaints of nobility settling for half comfort in a world that rarely promises more. And as the firelight fades and footsteps slow, you realize that whether royal or peasant, in the end, you're all just trying to find somewhere soft to rest your bones. You wake up to a soft knock, followed by a whisper that can only mean trouble. "Sorry, need the bed." You sit up, disoriented, blanket askew. Your noble servant bedmate is already halfway to the door, boots in hand, groggily obeying the innkeeper's orders. Apparently, the royals decided to leave at sunrise, and their entourage is reclaiming every inch of sleeping space for last-minute packing. With a resigned grunt, you slide out of bed. Again, you are handed a mug of something hot. Technically, herbal broth, but it tastes like if moss had opinions. And make your way downstairs, where the innkeeper looks unusually smug. "They're gone," he says, wiping down a table with what could be either a rag or a former sock. "And left a silver coin." You raise an eyebrow. "A whole silver coin?" He nods. "For the inconvenience of existing near them." Their words, you stifle a laugh. Nobility, always generous with other people's dignity. With the upper crust gone, the inn returns to its normal rhythm. Straw is refluffed. Boots are restolen. Someone's always losing boots. And the snoring resumes its usual chorus. But something else fills the space now. Tension. You notice it as soon as a young couple enters the common room, whispering and blushing. They glance around. The innkeeper, never one to miss a sales opportunity, walks over. "One bed left," he announces. "But I warn you, it's close quarters." The couple exchange glances. "We'll take it." It's official. We've entered the territory of romantic ambiguity in shared sleeping arrangements. And in the medieval inn world, this was complicated. See, shared beds weren't always just about economics. They were social spaces, sometimes intimate, sometimes awkward, often both. You could end up next to a stranger, a rival, or, like now, someone you wanted to be next to. But the rules didn't bend easily. No canoodling was an actual house rule at some inns. Others were more, let's say, permissive. A 15th century German tavern reportedly kept a tally of couples caught cavorting and turned it into a drinking game for regulars. Still, even in more liberal inns, things were rarely straightforward. You might want to snuggle. Your bedmate might want to sleep, or sing, or read aloud from a scroll they found in the privy. Historians still argue whether innkeepers turned a blind eye or actively encourage romantic encounters to increase bookings. There are records of beds being reserved for couples or curtained for privacy at a price, and even one inn that offered pillow talk packages, which probably sounded better in Latin. You find yourself sharing a bench near the fire with a group of travelers discussing just that. Bed etiquette and inborn relationships. "I met my husband in a half bed," says a woman in a red shawl. "He stole the blanket. I stole his bread." Romance. A grizzled man with one eye and half a beard chimes in. "I once woke up cuddling a priest. He was very understanding. Forgave me by breakfast." The group laughs, and you're struck by the odd tenderness in these stories. As uncomfortable as shared sleeping is, it sometimes leads to connection, warmth in a world that often lacks it. That night, you're assigned the infamous Room 11. The innkeeper raises an eyebrow as he hands you the key. "You sure?" "Room 11's popular." You nod, more curious than cautious. Room 11 turns out to be a slightly larger room with a better mattress and, wait for it, a curtain. Just one, and it's hanging from a bent iron rod that threatens to fall at any moment, but still. It's luxury by this inn's standards. You're already under the covers when your bedmate arrives, a young woman with an air of mystery and mud on her boots. She offers a nod. "Evening." You nod back. "Left side's warm." She smirks. "I'm a right-sider anyway." It's the politest conversation you've had all week. The curtain is drawn, though it only covers half the bed. Still, it creates a barrier, psychological, if nothing else. You both settle into your respective sides. A long silence follows, filled only by the creak of the bed frame and the distant sound of someone arguing with a goose. Then she speaks. "You think people ever get used to this?" You shrug. "Not sure. I think they just stop minding." She hums in agreement. "Had worse beds. Once slept in a tree." You turn slightly toward her, careful not to cross the blanket line. How was it? Cold, and squirrels don't share. You both laugh quietly. There's a strange intimacy in shared sleep, one that doesn't always need to be romantic. Sometimes, it's just comfort, company, knowing someone else is breathing beside you, also just trying to make it through the night without falling out of bed or getting kicked in the shins. You drift off like that, listening to her breathing, the rustle of straw, and the soft mutterings of Room 10's very vocal sleep talker. In this moment, medieval bed sharing feels less like an inconvenience and more like a peculiar kind of closeness. The inn may be full of odd rules, itchy sheets, and smells you'd rather not name, but tonight at least, you don't feel alone. And in a world without locks, personal space, or heating, that counts for a lot. The next morning, you're jolted awake by the bells of the nearby chapel. One long clang, followed by several shorter, more confused-sounding dings. Your bedmate from room 11 is already gone, her side of the blanket folded with military precision. You sit up slowly, blinking the sleep from your eyes, half expecting to see a goat in your room. No goat, just your boots, thankfully untouched, and the lingering warmth on the right side of the mattress. Downstairs, the inn feels different, busier. There's a subtle shift in the air, incense, mixed with the ever-present stew smell, of course, but still distinctly spiritual. A new wave of travelers has arrived, and they're not the ale-slinging merchant type. They're pilgrims, ragged cloaks, wooden staffs, dusty boots. Some wear scallop shells on their caps, badges marking them as having traveled the way of St. James. Others carry handwritten blessings or worn little books of psalms. There's even a barefoot monk sipping broth in the corner, radiating serenity despite clearly sitting in someone else's bowl. You find a spot near the hearth, nursing a cup of tea made from something that was once definitely a leaf, and watch as the innkeeper moves among the pilgrims with exaggerated humility. "Brothers," he says with a smile too wide, "and sisters, blessed are the weary. We've cleared room upstairs. 4 beds, all with, modest straw." Modest turns out to mean slightly less damp. Pilgrims were a regular sight at medieval inns, especially those situated near holy routes. And while many hostels catered specifically to them, religious travelers often mixed in with the general populace. This led to interesting interactions. Take the barefoot monk, now attempting to bless the stew pot. "Sir," the innkeeper says carefully, "we do not need divine intervention with the lentils." The monk smiles, undeterred. A little grace never hurt. You glance toward the bar and spot a sign scrawled in charcoal: "Pilgrims and clergy, discount with relic." You raise an eyebrow. Turns out, offering a holy relic was sometimes accepted as proof of pilgrimage, and even as payment. Of course, relics ranged wildly in legitimacy. Some were real bone fragments of saints. Others were enthusiastic interpretations, like a thorn from the burning bush, or St. Lawrence's eyebrow. Historians still argue whether most of these relics were revered or ridiculed by innkeepers. Some saw them as blessings. Others saw them as bartering chips, and not especially useful ones. One famous inn record lists a piece of the true cross given in lieu of coin, next to a scribbled note, "Made good kindling." But pilgrims weren't just spiritual tourists. They were also sleep-deprived travelers. And they too were subject to the great half-bed shuffle. You're placed in room 4 that night, assigned to share with a newly arrived friar who smiles too much and carries a bag full of mystery herbs. As you climb into bed, he bows his head in prayer, murmuring Latin so softly it sounds like bees whispering bedtime stories. Then he lies down, hands folded on his chest, and immediately begins snoring in a tone best described as woodwind instrument falling down a well. You turn toward the wall and remind yourself this is probably good karma. Religious guests were often granted special treatment. Inns might offer better straw, quieter rooms, or even let monks sleep by the fire, though usually only if they promised not to preach during breakfast. But not all pilgrims were pious. Later that evening, you hear a scuffle outside your room. You crack the door and peer into the hall just in time to witness a group of pilgrims arguing over bed assignments. I slept here last night. That was room 5. They all look the same. The innkeeper intervenes, holding up a candle like a referee. Who's got the scallop shell? He asks. 5 hands shoot up. Right. No scallop privileges tonight. You're on the floor. He points to a straw pile in the hallway, labeled overflow. This chaotic scene isn't unusual. Inns near major pilgrimage routes often overflowed. Travelers slept in stairwells, under tables, even in barns. Shared beds were not just accepted, they were expected. And when the place filled to bursting, guests were triaged like cargo. Clergy got priority, women and elderly next. Then came the loudest complainers. Always, you return to your bed, where the friar has shifted onto his side and is now snoring directly into your ear's gravitational field. You gently nudge him. He rolls back, murmurs, "Amen," and resumes snoring at a slightly different frequency. Not better, just different. Still, you manage to fall asleep. And in your dreams, you're walking the pilgrimage road yourself, dodging cows, blessing soup, bartering relics for blanket space. Come morning, you wake to find a pressed flower tucked beside your bed, a small gesture, probably from the friar, or maybe from the goose. You no longer question such things. Over breakfast, the pilgrims discuss dreams, sore feet, and where they might find a decent privy that doesn't involve a goat. One of them passes around a tiny vial of holy water, which promptly spills into someone's porridge. No one blinks. It's now blessed stew. You ask the innkeeper if having religious guests changes the business. He shrugs. They don't drink as much, but they don't throw stools either, swings and roundabouts. That's the heart of it. Pilgrims and clergy brought calm, occasional chaos, and a unique flavor to the already odd broth of medieval inn culture. And they slept like everyone else, awkwardly, half covered, often next to someone quoting scripture in their sleep. As you sip your tea, you realize you've become used to the strange intimacy of half beds. You no longer flinch when someone kicks in their sleep or starts snoring in Latin. You've survived Old Henry, Room 11, the goose, and now a friar with night sneeze. And you're still here, still sleeping, still sharing. Somehow, this shared discomfort has become a kind of comfort in itself. Tonight, the inn is alive in a way you haven't seen before. You've grown accustomed to its usual rhythms, clinking mugs, tired footsteps, and the occasional goat-related shriek. But this is something else entirely. It's the festival. You don't know the name, probably something to do with a saint who once cured chickens. But the entire town is celebrating, and the inn has become ground zero for jubilation. People are spilling in from every muddy direction. Travelers, locals, traders, 2 minstrels who won't stop playing the same 3 notes on a lute. You barely squeeze through the front door before someone thrusts a mug into your hand and shouts, "To the blessed toe of Saint Bertrand." You raise your mug. Who is Saint Bertrand? You don't know, but you're now contractually obligated to toast him. The innkeeper sees you and laughs, really laughs. His cheeks are rosy. His apron has been turned inside out for no apparent reason, and his usually cynical eyes are sparkling with the unmistakable glint of coin. "Room's full," he says before you can even ask. "Floor's full, hearth's taken. You want a space? You best find one quick." You glance around. It's chaos. A man is asleep beneath a bench. A woman is sleeping on the bench, cradling a large ham. There's a rooster perched on the bar, seemingly judging the entire event. And upstairs? Forget about it. Rooms are packed beyond reason. A local legend says that on this night, Room 2 has hosted 16 people and a mime. You don't doubt it. You scout out a corner near the back stairs and spot what looks like half a blanket wedged between a flour sack and an empty barrel. Perfect. You claim it just as a limping man arrives with the same idea. You exchange a look. "Half?" you offer. He nods. "Top or bottom?" "Side by side, please." And so begins perhaps the most unglamorous night of your journey. Sleeping beside a stranger on a stone floor, a barrel for a pillow, and a party in full swing downstairs. Yet somehow, it's comforting. There's something oddly reassuring about being packed in like sardines with 100 other warm, snoring, stew-fed humans. It's as if the entire inn is breathing in unison. But sleep won't come easily tonight. Not with the revelry echoing through the walls. You hear singing, stomping, someone trying to juggle spoons and failing spectacularly. There's even a dramatic shriek, followed by thunderous applause. Probably the mime. The limping man beside you starts humming softly, a tune you recognize from 2 towns ago. A traveling song. You hum along. He nods in approval and closes his eyes. As the noise continues, you reflect on how far you've come in your sleeping journey. From your first awkward encounter with old Henry, to curling up beside a noble servant, a friar, a merchant, and now a half-drunken reveler with a foot injury, you've become a connoisseur of communal sleep. It's not just about beds anymore. It's about the stories that sleep carries. Every night has brought a different energy, a different rhythm, a different neighbor. And tonight's neighbor smells like onions and triumph. The innkeeper wanders past, shaking his head and laughing. "Never thought I'd see the day we charge for floor corners. I should start a second inn." You chuckle. "You'd fill it in a day." He grins. "Only if I charge by the square foot," and that's exactly what's happening. Someone's actually rented the area beneath the stairs. Another traveler is curled up behind the door, risking a rude awakening if anyone enters with enthusiasm. A third has chosen the top of a barrel as his bed. How he's staying balanced, you'll never know. Historically, this kind of overstuffing wasn't rare. During holy days, harvest festivals, or royal visits, inns became free-for-alls. Travelers expected to sleep sitting up, pressed against walls, or with strangers' feet in their faces. The lucky ones got straw. The unlucky ones got splinters. Records from the 14th century France describe festival inns, where guests were assigned time slots on beds, rotating like shifts at a bakery. Others simply laid out cloaks in the yard and hoped it didn't rain. Historians still debate whether these overcrowded nights were seen as joyful or just endured. Some accounts praise the communal spirit. Others, like the famously grumpy Italian merchant Baldassare Bardi, wrote that he slept with rats, a priest, and an accordion player, and the priest snored the worst. Tonight feels closer to joy. The energy is buoyant, absurd, and deeply human. You doze intermittently, woken by laughter, singing, and once by someone trying to use your blanket as a scarf. You reclaim it with a sleepy grunt. The limping man doesn't stir. He's dreaming of roast geese, probably. Around dawn, the inn starts to quiet. The party winds down. Laughter turns to murmurs. Footsteps soften. The rooster, still perched on the bar, closes one eye. The innkeeper appears again, now with a bucket and mop, looking like a man facing battle. He sees you, curled in your corner, and gives you a tired smile. Still alive? Barely. Good. That's my inn's motto. You sit up, stretch your sore limbs, and glance around at the sea of snoring strangers. A minstrel snores beside his lute. A child sleeps under the table with a dog. A nun rests with her head on a cabbage. And you? You've survived one more night in the strange, vibrant, flea-bitten theater of medieval inns. No bed tonight, no blanket to call your own. But somehow, the floor was enough. The noise became lullaby. The strangers, fellow travelers, the chaos almost cozy. And just before you stand to leave, your floor mate mumbles, "Top next time." You grin. Sure, by now, the inn feels less like a place and more like a creature. Alive, breathing, shifting with the tides of travelers. It snores, it laughs, it grumbles, it hiccups. And this morning, it smells strongly of spilled ale, ash, and something that might have been eel pie once upon a time. You make your way downstairs, rubbing the imprint of a barrel hoop from your cheek. Around you, last night's chaos lies in gentle ruin. A single boot dangles from a ceiling beam. Someone's cloak has become a curtain. The rooster is gone, possibly ascended, possibly stolen. The innkeeper offers you a mug of weak broth and a knowing nod. Last night, he says, was something. You nod. You ever think about building more beds? He chuckles darkly. And rob myself of the joy of telling people, no room, but I got some clean straw near the fireplace. Never. He waves a hand around the room. You know, this place wasn't always like this. My father ran it like a monastery. Quiet, orderly, boring. He smiles. I fixed that. But it wasn't just him. Change was coming anyway, and you're beginning to notice it. Like the way a breeze carries a new season. Inns, once chaotic patchworks of communal slumber, are slowly transforming. And tonight, you get to experience something rare. You've been given your own bed. Not a half. Not a sack of straw next to a potted turnip. A full, real bed. Mattress, blanket, pillow, no stranger snoring beside you, no blanket tug of war, just space. It's room 8, newly repaired. A private chamber. The innkeeper says it was once a storage closet. You don't care. It's got a lock, a tiny window, and best of all, only your name on the ledger. You step inside and close the door behind you. It clicks shut like a punctuation mark on a very long sentence. This is the future, in its earliest, clumsiest form. In the late medieval period, especially from the 15th century onward, changes in travel, trade, and rising wealth began reshaping inns. Private rooms, once a noble's luxury, became more common. Curtains gave way to doors. Shared beds gave way to single occupancy, at least for those who could afford it. As cities grew and travel expanded, the inn industry adjusted. Merchants wanted privacy to guard their wares. Officials needed quiet for paperwork. Travelers began expecting not just shelter, but comfort. And slowly, the age of the half-bed began to fade. Historians still debate whether this shift was driven more by economics or changing social norms. Some suggest that the rise of the middle class pushed inns toward individualism. Others blame the Black Death, which made people a tad squeamish about bodily proximity. But whatever the reason, inns evolved. You lie down on your bed. It creaks, naturally, but in a dignified way. You stretch your arms without elbowing anyone. You pull the blanket entirely over your body. You stare at the ceiling, marveling at the quiet. You half expect someone to burst in and claim the right side. No one does. Downstairs, the inn continues its nightly symphony. Mugs clinking, voices rising, a lute that just won't stop. But in here, peace. For the first time in days, maybe weeks, you're truly alone, and you're not sure how you feel about it. Because as much as you've longed for solitude, there's something about sharing sleep that stays with you. The farmer's whistle, the merchant's goose, the friar's nocturnal Latin, the strange unspoken bond of having dreamt beside another human being. Awkwardly, but honestly. You've learned to sleep through elbows, snoring, laughter, and doorless thresholds. You've witnessed the absurdity of quarter beds and overheard confessions in the dark. You've been kicked, hugged, and once, very briefly, spooned by accident. And now, you sleep alone. It's nice, but also a little lonely. Because half a bed, as it turns out, sometimes brings a full heart. And so, tonight, as the fire crackles low and the last footsteps fade beyond your door, you finally stretch out in your own space, wrapped in stillness. The room holds the faint scent of lavender and smoke, with the cool night air seeping gently through the window cracks. Your body, tired in that satisfying, earned way, sinks deeper into the mattress. No elbows brush against you. No blanket is being tugged away. No stranger mutters in dreams about turnips or saintly toes. The world outside hums with distant sounds, a door closing softly, the wind stirring the leaves, the muted shuffle of boots in the courtyard. But inside, you're cocooned in comfort. For the first time in what feels like forever, there's no need to sleep with one eye open. No worry about the warmth of the other half, or whether you'll wake up beneath someone else's knee. You breathe slowly, each inhale softer, each exhale a little longer. Your thoughts begin to drift, back to straw-filled rooms, crooked floorboards, whispered prayers, and quiet moments of shared humanity. All of it, absurd and oddly beautiful, a patchwork of sleep and strangers stitched together in the most peculiar inn. And now, nothing to do, nowhere to be, no one to share the space with but yourself. Close your eyes. Let the silence wrap around you like a warm woolen cloak. Let your mind grow heavy and quiet. The night holds you. You're safe, and you're home, if only for this one gentle, peaceful night. End of script. Sweet dreams.